Welcome to Restless. My name is Father Joseph Gill, priest of the Diocese of Bridgeport,
My
Connecticut,
arms.
and you've joined myself and Joe and Lauren as we seek the face of Christ in the midst of today's mixed up world. And I'll tell you one thing that is very mixed up for many young adults is the virtue of chastity. And I were reflecting right before this episode that we've had about 200 episodes and we've never actually spoken about this topic directly. Certainly, it's come up when we talked about marriage or dating or things like that. But chastity is is a big topic and a controversial one in today's world that's post-sexual revolution. So first, I think we got to define the term chastity because I think it's very misunderstood and I think it has a very negative connotation. So, in your own words, this is for 5 points. What is
Sweet. Out of how many?
what is chastity? You don't have any chastity?
He said, out of how many
Oh, out of
points?
how many points? Oh,
Yeah.
out of 100. I don't know.
I've been reading a book about chastity by Bishop Eric Varden, which we were discussing earlier. It's called, I think it's called Chastity on the Reconciliation of the Senses, maybe. And one of the ways he describes chastity, or really how he describes unchastity, which kind of gives us the photonegative chastity, is that like lust is a desire to possess rather than to be in a communion with. And so I think that like chastity is the ability to relate to people without desiring to sort of possess them, in a sort of lustful way.
I think that goes closely with John Paul II's emphasis in theology of the body on using.
Yeah.
He would say that unchastity is probably using another person for one's own sexual pleasure.
So right order in your sexual life?
Oh, I like that definition. Right ordering. So that's simple enough, but it's rich in that the right order, I think, is very simple. And when I teach 8th grade about chastity, I say, there's 3 parts of chastity. Our sexual life is given to us for marriage between a man and a woman open to life. It's really that simple. So any veering from that path is where the sins of unchastity come about.
Right. And depending on your state in life, it means different things.
Right, which is an important thing because a lot of people think chastity ends when you get married. You don't need to be chaste anymore. But that's not the case, right?
And they don't
Chastity is
understand what chastity is then.
right.
They have a wrong interpretation of it.
And conversely, to Father's point, a lot of times if you start talking to like teenagers about chastity, they think that you're just talking about not having sex, period, which also is very much not what we mean by chastity, right? Because if you are a married person, chastity does not mean abstinence, like, per
No.
se. It might mean abstinence in certain situations and for certain periods of time, but doesn't mean abstinence full stop at all.
Right. So is it possible? There's a way to live chastity in marriage. Is it possible then to? I mean, other than like obviously adultery, is it possible to sin unchaste, like to have an unchaste sexual life with your spouse?
Well, yeah, I mean, any sexual relationship which deviates from God's plan, right? So any sexual act that's not potentially generative, right, for one thing, and unitive, right, is lustful, I would say. I wouldn't just say it's true, but it's the church
Yeah.
would say it, yeah.
No, but I think even sometimes seeing your spouse merely as an object, I just want to gratify myself by being with you, even if it is your spouse. That's not the calling, the high calling of what chastity calls us to. John Paul II says that the only right response to another human being is love. So even within marriage, the other person can give you a lot of benefits, but it's ultimately to give of oneself, even in the sexual act, to the other.
There's actually a third category, of sins of lust within the context of marriage, right? So there's adultery, there's sort of like sins of lust with a third party, sins of lust with your spouse. There's also just the sins of lust involving just yourself, right? Which would mean things like pornography or masturbation, something like that. Right. Hopefully I can say those words on air. I guess I'm about to find out.
I think they've been said
But
before.
like it's easy enough to think like, well, yeah, sure, they're sins, but they're kind of my private sins. Like, no, they're not. I mean, because if marriage is the sort of full, free, total gift of self to another, well, you're not totally giving yourself exclusive. Well, you're not exclusive. You're not really totally giving yourself to another if you're also giving yourself to pornographic websites or to your own sexual fantasies or whatever. Like you're actually you're sort of cheapening this gift of self that you're giving to your spouse by giving it to others, even if those others aren't sort of in the same room as you, right? You're still kind of giving this gift to others.
And I think one of the highest challenge with that is that not only is it something that one must take care of in one's actions, but even in one's thoughts. And there's such a thing as emotional unchastity, where you don't commit the sin of adultery, but in your heart, perhaps you've given it away to another woman or man, or you just fantasize even just about, what would it be like if I got married to, that guy over there? And then Just kind of go on
Mhm.
that mental exercise, and that
Right.
can be a giving away of one's heart in
Right.
an illicit manner.
And letting those thoughts continue to go would be where the sin is.
Right, right. Because I mean, it's I think until there's the old story about somebody asked the bishop, when do you stop having, thoughts about women? The bishop said 5 minutes after you're dead.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's just human nature that we're really hardwired. And John Paul II talks about that we were made for communion, in
Mhm.
that like even our bodies are incomplete until they're completed with this partner that we
Mm.
have. So it's naturally hardwired into us to want to give of ourselves, even sexually, but we're not animals either. In
Right.
that we don't have to do it indiscriminately.
So how do you do that? You
That
know?
is a great question.
Secular people, I think it's a very common thought. It is not possible to live chastity, if you're a priest or religious, let's say.
Or
Live
even
it
a
purely.
single young adult in the world. I mean, a lot of people who are listening are teenagers,
Yeah.
or single people in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah. In some ways, that might be actually harder, right? Because you're expected to engage in the dating world, but to do so chastely. Whereas you and I are just expected to just live, live
Interesting.
totally celibate lives, which is in some ways easier because you can just disconnect from it, from the
Yeah.
physical entirely. Different asking a 15-year-old to go on a date with a girl, but not to do it unchastely. It's like, oh, geez, like, all right, like, what does that mean? What does that mean for me,
Yeah, sure, sure. So what's your tip? So what have you seen as helpful in the lives of young adults?
Oh, I don't know about that. I think a lot of young adults are doing it wrong.
What would you
That's
suggest as
fair.
improvements?
What improvements? Yeah, how can we live chastely?
Yeah, and trying to get away with more than they should. I mean, we've done a dating series twice at St. Cecilia's, and through that, I wasn't asked directly, but I know our moderators were, well, like, how far can you go, right?
Mm,
Like, what's the limit? And I'm like,
Right.
all right, if you're like,
Right. That
I don't
mindset's the
know,
problem.
20 or older, you should know. You should not need to ask that question. But I'm told, no, they do need to know.
But also, like, that question, kind of indicates the problem, right? Which is that we're thinking of chastity as, okay, well, what lines can I not cross? Okay, tell me what I'm allowed to do, what I'm not allowed to do. Give me the rule book, I'll play by it. But that's not at all what we're looking for. Like,
yeah.
like chastity is the total integration of self, right?
Mm-hmm.
Such that you can just live freely, and it's not it's not a set of guidelines that you have to like sort of be afraid to transgress, right? It's a call to this a deeper form of love. So it's not a bad thing they're trying to stay on the right side of, right? It's a good gift you're trying to embrace. So it's not limiting. It's upward. It's boundary expanding, really. You know what I mean? In a real in a sense.
Well, that's a great insight. Because I think a lot of people associate chastity with prudishness,
Yeah.
and I think the two are
Instead
not
of
the same.
prudenceness.
What?
Instead of prudence.
Prudence. Okay, prudenceness.
Yeah, well, I'm trying to,
You just made that word
I'm
up.
trying to continue, I'm playing words here, Father.
But prudishness would be like sex is a bad thing.
Right.
We want to avoid it because it's not, not healthy. And I think even in the Catholic Church, there's been a theme of that, especially from Jansenism, which was a 17th, 18th century heresy, which is kind of almost like the body is bad, pleasure is bad. Avoid it at all costs. But that's not, that's not the case at all. And
No.
Yeah, I also think
So-
that that's not. I don't think that that's actually the lie the world believes by and large. I think it doesn't believe the body's bad. I think it believes the body is meaningless,
yes,
right? And therefore, do whatever you want with it because it doesn't really mean anything ultimately,
hmm
right? So I think that's also
Or
a
is
huge
it
problem.
the opposite? That we put too much emphasis on the body of
Well-
staying looking young, staying super fit.
Well, I think it could be two
My
things.
body, my
I think like
choice.
on the one hand, it's some people think like, well, the body's all I have. So like, right, so there's nothing after this. The body's just something I own, but it's the only thing. It's really all I have. So I only have it for the short time, so I'm just gonna go wild. I think there's some people who just think like, well, my body doesn't mean anything. So what does it matter what I do with it? What does it matter if I sleep around or whatever? It doesn't mean anything. And those are, I think, sort of like two modern heresies
Yeah.
that are competing for people's attention, and they're crowding out. They have a tendency to crowd out the truth, which is that your body does matter, but it's not all you have, right? It's actually something pointing you to something greater, but it still matters, which is I think a difficult line for us to walk, but I think it's a line we have to try to walk
Yeah.
And it's connected to your soul.
That's the important thing. Yeah.
So
intimately, like not one thing owning the other, but it is you are your
Mhm.
body and your soul.
Right.
so if you're sinning sexually, you're damaging your soul, or your soul is damaged and it's causing you to sin
Act out that
sexually.
way, yeah. Definitely. But I'm gonna go back to that question about how far is too far, because I think there's one very simple answer to that question, and it's connected to love. And when people ask me that question, and I work in high school, we get the question quite a bit. Is it okay to hold hands, kiss, make out? Like what? My answer is, what would you want your future wife to be doing with her boyfriend right now? Because ultimately, the whole point of chastity before marriage is to save yourself for this one self-gift that you're going to be giving of yourself completely. And so if you would feel comfortable with your future spouse making out, perhaps you have a strange view of...
I certainly see the usefulness of that advice, but do you think there's a risk of that advice making the question too relative? Like there might be some super possessive guy that's like, yeah, I wouldn't want my wife to be even looking at her boyfriend right now because she's my wife. It's like, all right, dude, like take a deep breath, right? Like
that's true.
Or it might be some sort of libertine guy that's like, wow, like
subjection.
whatever she wants to be doing, right? As long as like whatever. Like I think I'll
Right.
say why that's like a useful sort of like
You're right. And if a guy is on either side of that spectrum, I would not use that question
and
with,
not
like,
just a guy, right?
or a
But I
girl,
just think, yeah, I mean, I think like this, it sort of comes. This is one line of sort of thinking I sometimes kind of sort of object to in chastity talk, which is like the chastity speaker will say to the girls in the room, like, and like girls, or sorry, he'll say to the guys in the room, guys, remember, that girl's someone's daughter. And it's like, yeah, that's true, but it's also not the point because her value doesn't come from the fact that she's, Steve's daughter. You know what I mean? Like she comes to the back that she's God's daughter, right? So like, that's not what
Yeah.
you mean, right? So like, I do think that we should be careful not to, draw
Yeah.
root chastity in our relative relationships with each other because that's actually not what it is, right? Like
Well, that's
I
true.
don't have value because I'm my parents' son or because of anything really. My value comes from the fact that I'm created in the image likeness of God, that I'm
Right.
His son by adoption.
And even if you're, even if you fall in love with somebody who's had a sexual past, that doesn't mean that they're worthless. It doesn't
Right.
mean, that necessarily they've given their heart away, even if they've given their body away. There's always that chance of redemption with that. Absolutely. But I do remember being very inspired by one particular couple I knew from college who they never kissed. And they were like the most romantic couple, like always holding hands, always together, doing great stuff together. And I asked the guy, his name was Wayne. I was like, Wayne, wait, have you ever kissed her? Because like I've seen you guys like for 3 years, like you're dating, like you've proposed. And he said, no, I never kissed her because he said, I figured that after, if we get married, then we're gonna have plenty of time to kiss. And if we don't get married, I don't want those memories when I'm kissing the next girl. I thought that was kind of an interesting insight. I mean, I'm not saying that's like the gold
Right.
standard for everybody, but
I don't know. If you're in love with someone, I don't know how you do not kiss them for 3 years.
Might be an argument to not date somebody for 3 years before marriage. I mean, but I do like not this person obviously because they're clearly trying to live chastely, but I do think that sometimes people will be like, well, I can't imagine not sleeping with my boyfriend while we're dating. It's yeah, because you dated for 10 years. But if you were living chastity, you wouldn't be dating for 10 years, right? You're dating him
so
for 2
many
years.
people.
Like, people like, their language gets so confused on this, right?
but that's an important piece though, because if you're waiting for marriage, then marriage comes quicker because you're waiting for it. Rather than I'll marry when I get around to it, and then it's 5, 6, 7 years because you're having all the benefits of marriage without the commitment. And
well, you think you are. You're actually not, but yeah.
well,
Right.
You're actually living a lie, but
And
Right.
there's probably a fear of commitment there.
sure.
I would say most commonly on the side of the men.
yeah. But isn't
Probably
it
right.
isn't it crazy that we think like, oh, I'm a fear of commitment, so I'm just gonna sleep. I'm just gonna have sex with her and then not. It's like what, like what, like what,
Isn't that a bigger
yeah, like what?
commitment?
Like, it's like you're not with her
not
physically,
to them.
but you're not gonna commit to a joint bank account. Like what do you know what I mean? Like it's crazy to me.
Yeah.
It's
So
It's a disillusion
it's a
that's been
permanent thing
spread,
they're afraid of.
and it's so accepted.
yeah,
It's the norm to
sure.
date for a time, live together for a pretty long time, and then get married maybe.
Well, you see that. I mean, there's just in our modern culture, especially with young adults and young people, there's this idea that we have to keep all the options open. And so you even see that in terms of like, people who go off to college and have no idea what they want to study because they're just like, I just want to keep my options open. I don't want to make a commitment one path or another. Quit my job after a year if I get bored. There's not a whole lot of like
Hmm.
locking
about
yourself in. with it.
Trust in God.
Yeah.
People don't have a relationship with Him.
I mean, those people might be saying they're trusting in God by going forward without a plan, though, wouldn't they? Some might.
Maybe. Yeah. But I think at some point you have to set down roots in
Oh
your
yeah,
life.
no
and,
doubt.
Can't be drifting forever unless it is your calling. When there've been some saints that have done that. I love Saint Benedict Joseph Labre. Ever heard of that guy?
No.
Yeah, so he fled a bunch of monasteries and kept getting rejected because of his poor health, and so he decided God was calling him to be homeless. And he was, and so he made several pilgrimages. He was from Italy, I think, or something, and he made several pilgrimages, maybe France. He made several pilgrimages to Santiago de Compostela, to Rome, to Jerusalem on foot, and just begged. And towards the end of his life, he died in his late 40s because it's kind of hard life to live on the road like that. He ended up living in the Colosseum, which at the time in the 1500s was this rundown thing. It was not a tourist attraction whatsoever. So it was kind of like the place where like the cats hung out and like pigeons and stuff. So he made that his home, and he visited all the churches in Rome as frequently as he could, and people knew him as the holy beggar. But I don't recommend that for everyone.
Right.
No.
No. Sorry, that was way off
No, it's an
topic.
interesting story. I mean, if that was God's calling for him, that's unique, interesting. But I think most people do not have a relationship with God. They don't trust. So they're keeping their options open, like you said. They're not willing to commit. They don't want to do the hard thing, you know?
Exactly. So, let's be honest though, like chastity is one of the more difficult virtues. Why do you think God gave us such a strong, sex drive? And why is it so difficult for us? Couldn't God have made it easier?
I wonder if it's is it a requirement in order for the human species to have continued to reproduce
Oh, that's true.
despite difficult times throughout our human history, or is it just in his goodness that he made it so good for when it's done right? It's this beautiful union, right?
Yeah, I
It's
agree.
amazing.
Yeah,
But when it's done wrong, it's really damaging, and it causes, like, I don't know if it causes a lot of sin or the devil or just our concupiscence, right?
Yeah.
Well, yeah, mix of things. Right?
Yeah, a mix of things.
And of course, I mean, it's different now than that 300 years ago, you were married by 18. So you didn't have to live
True.
chastity as long as you have to live it now, which
Well,
is
you know,
now
you-
15
I
years.
mean, you did because you had to live until you died. I mean, like like.
That's right.
You know,
I'm sorry, but not let's sell this, the
Well,
abstinent.
I think it's easy though to
Abstinent.
like look back at these time periods, and be like, oh, look how great everything was. Everybody got married when they're 18. It's like, okay, you know what they were doing. Like, how do you know what was going on otherwise? I mean, you have no way of knowing. Maybe it was a super chaste culture, but like, I don't think we look at the surface and be like, well, they were married young. Like, yeah, so they had to be married young, but like maybe they were also adulterous. Like adultery existed.
I'm
you
sure,
know?
yeah,
Like,
no,
Yeah,
I mean,
or
it's
not necessarily in good marriages. 18 seems way too young to me.
I guess if you die at 35 or something like that, right? But like, it's relative.
True.
I agree with you though. I think
That
that
young.
I think God made the sexual desire so good because He made sex so good. We desire something because it's just so beautiful. It's a hobby horse of mine, but when Adam and Eve commit the first sin because they wanted to be like God, the tragic irony is that they already were like God because they already were in a loving relationship that loved so much they produced another. They already were participating in the inner life of the Trinity. So like it's so good that it was already with us in the garden. Like it's so good that it lets us participate in God's inner life. So yeah,
Yeah.
of course we desire it. I mean, how could you not? You know what I mean? It's so good. You know?
Right, it is so good, but it's like, I don't know. It's a wild beast. It's so difficult to tame and to correct. I mean, I think when we fell, of course, all of our goods became disordered, and we start desiring lower goods rather than higher goods. And the lowest good, of course, is pleasure. It's good, but it's a pretty base good. It's the highest type of good, of course, is love. So it's just perhaps it's because it was such a high good, it fell to such a devastating
Right.
place that it's now indeed not only destructive, but such a strong desire, even to the point of many people struggle with addictions to these kinds of things. And
Right. So, as a priest who hears confessions, maybe you would know the answer to this. What do you think is the hardest state in life to live chastity right? Single, not dating. Single, dating, or married?
I don't think I could say one of them because it really depends on the person living it. Yeah, I think to live chastity in dating, you do have to have a lot of self-possession. Absolutely, and self-control. But you gain that through being single and not dating.
Interesting.
Because I don't think you gain the self-possession. You can't give yourself away unless you first possess yourself. You have that kind of freedom. So if someone starts dating and they have not yet mastered themselves, they're going to fall prey to whatever slavery they fall into. And maybe it's not a physical thing. Maybe it's just simply idolizing your girlfriend or boyfriend, putting them on a pedestal, making your life revolve around them, which is also not good.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because like even related to what you were asking, like why is the sexual desire so great? I mean, I think we also cannot overlook the influence of a culture which really insists on sexualizing very young people very quickly. Not, I mean, like obviously I'm talking at least in part about the widespread access to pornography, especially for young kids.
Oh, it's huge.
I mean, I think
Such
it's
a problem.
parenthetically, I think it's noteworthy that when states try to pass laws requiring pornography sites to beef up their age authentication, they just pull out of the state entirely. because they know it's not economically feasible for them because they know their business model relies on children, right? So that's
Mm.
that's noteworthy. But also, I think just like even just popular culture that's sort of more mild, still, yeah, like it leads to a heightened awareness of the sexual life at a younger and younger age, and it increasingly has no interest in drawing lines, right? Of like, okay, well, this is not the kind of thing we put in a show for the kid this age, right?
Yeah.
Because it's gonna lead them to ask questions they don't need the answer to yet. There's like a coarsening of the culture, um, which make how do you ever possess yourself if you're exposed? Forget about pornography for a second. If you're just exposed to this entire world when you're 9, I
Yeah.
mean, possess what? You don't have anything to possess yet. You don't even you're not like you don't have a sexuality to possess yet, but you've already lost possession of it. You know what I mean? So you gotta feel for these kids, right? It's like how could
Oh,
you? I
it's
mean, I have no
really
fight. How
tough.
do you
I
have a fighting
mean,
chance? You know what I mean?
the number of like 7th and 8th graders who already have boyfriends and girlfriends.
Yeah.
They're like, what's the point? Because if the point
Right.
of dating is to marry, and
Right.
you're in 7th grade, like
Right.
you're nowhere near dating, marrying age. So what are you doing? You're preparing yourself for a broken heart,
For failure.
and
Yeah.
you're preparing yourself for lapses in chastity, and parents very much encourage that.
Right.
And
Yeah. And we've all known people or met people or who have no identity outside of the person whom they're dating, right? And so it's like, what's going on with this person? Well, they got a new boyfriend. Didn't they just break up with the last one? Yeah, but they got to have a boyfriend. Like, right? There are people who just simply cannot be single. And I really like your point of, that in order to date chastely, you need to be single chastely because you need to learn to possess yourself. I think that's totally true.
yeah, and that's a I mean the goal of self-possession is a lifelong goal to work towards, because there's a lot of things, especially in today's world. And you brought up the culture. Of course, we have the sexual revolution in the 60s, which was pretty devastating. What are some of the effects of that, and the effects of unchastity that you see maybe among other young adults or just in the world in general? You talked about the coarsening of culture.
Yeah, I mean, I remain sort of skeptical of everything, right? So like, I'm sort of
Yeah.
skeptical that was ever like a great time for any of this stuff. But I do think that the fact that at one point in American history we all had to at least pretend that we were living chastely, right? Like at
Right.
one point actors at least pretended they were good people, right? Like so
Well,
that's probably it's probably good that they felt they had to do that,
one of the
right?
things that's always boggled my mind is the fact that if you go back to early church, what were they debating about? They're debating about the Trinity, the highest, most loftiest things. What are we debating about in the church now? Whether or not gay people should be allowed to be sexually active and married in the church. Like, I mean, that kind of stuff, like we have totally fallen from this
Interesting.
hugely like profound thoughts. And because of the sexual revolution, our thoughts have become more base. I don't think we have the ability to even take seriously deeper questions because we're very carnal.
Yeah, I mean, there's a total just loss of like the imagination. There's a loss of the part of the imagination that can entertain the idea that there is a sexual morality past consent. You know what I mean? Like the sexual revolution really does seem to have just boiled down all of sexual morality to contract law, right? Which is it deals in theft and obligation and consent. Then that's it. And there's no ability to even like imagine that there could even possibly be right any kind of sexual ethic code that transcends what you give someone consent to do, whether you were old enough or sober enough or
Right.
or emotionally possessed enough to give consent. Like there's so much, yeah. There's just a total lack of imaginative vision there.
Right, because unfortunately, a lot of morality has been boiled down to consequences, right? And if you don't see an immediate consequence of it, you're like, oh, well, it's not harming anyone.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, it harms our soul, which we know
Yeah.
through faith.
Mm-hmm.
Unborn children that are murdered,
Unborn children,
homes that are wrecked, and people's sexualities who are perverted because they're exposed too young to things, right? I mean,
yeah,
there's the
yeah.
wake of destruction.
The number of addictions. I mean, I can't tell you the number of people that come to my confessional who are addicted to porn, absolutely addicted and enslaved, and they wish they were free,
Right.
but they started when they were a teenager or younger, and
And like the wink, wink, nod, nod about parents, like, oh, well, he's a teenager now, like, knock before you enter. It's like, dude, like,
Ugh.
have some care for your kid, right? Like, I mean, I'm sorry to judge you, but like,
yeah,
you don't, it's like, you wouldn't be like, oh, he's a teenager now. If you see some, like white lines on his dresser, well, he's experimenting with drugs. It's fine. It's like knock before you enter. It's crazy. It's absolutely
Yeah.
nuts. You're saying the exact same thing, though. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You are saying the exact same thing. You know what I mean?
right. Honestly, if I could give one message to parents, it's please do not give your kid an unfiltered smartphone.
Oh, yeah.
Do not give your kid under 18. I don't
Right.
care if they're 17 years old.
Right.
Don't give them an
Mhm.
unfiltered smartphone.
And by the way,
what do you think
yeah.
they're looking at? Boys and girls.
Right. And a kid
Yeah.
before high school shouldn't have a smartphone, period, in my opinion, but certainly not
Yeah.
unfiltered. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you wouldn't turn them loose in an X-rated movie shop. Not that
Mm-hmm.
they have those anymore because you don't need them.
It's
Right,
just on
yeah.
your phone.
It's on your
They
phone.
don't even need to search for it
Right.
if they have Instagram
Sadly.
or
yeah.
Snapchat. It's just
And
all
that's the
in
thing.
your
A lot
face.
of times it comes up very accidentally
Yeah.
for these people. So what tips then can we give to young adults who may be struggling in chastity? Some very practical, concrete tips. What do you think is
I go back
helpful?
to my tried and true adoration.
Bingo,
If
yes.
you're not going once a week for an hour, that's the problem you need to fix right now. I mean, God fixes our traumas, our hurts, our past pains, and so putting your soul in front of His is so healing.
Yeah.
And just persist in that,
And
even
with
if
that,
it's hard.
confession,
Oh yeah, of
openly and
course.
honestly. And that's
Yeah.
hard. It's hard to confess
Regularly.
those sins of impurity, but
Right.
necessary.
Hmm.
Things can only be healed if they're brought to the light.
Yeah.
Right. I would say also you need to believe that freedom from unchastity and lust is possible.
Yeah.
Because if you don't believe that, then what you're going to do is you're going to make goals and you're going to compromise your way back to sin almost immediately. Right. So you're going to tell yourself that, well, I'm not going to go, I can't go more than a week. So I'm not even going to try to go more than an hour. I'm not even going to try to get up because I know I can't. Like, it's a lie that evil one is telling you. You
Mhm.
can be free. It is possible. So you need to believe that. That's all. I honestly don't think you can make any progress if you don't believe that truth.
Absolutely.
You know?
Absolutely. Also, too, Jesus was very serious when he said, if your hand causes you to sin, cut it off. And obviously not body parts, but if your smartphone causes you to sin, get a dumb phone.
I would say everybody
know?
probably knows what it is that's leading them.
Yeah, if it's a
to sexually
relationship,
sin.
Yeah.
you got to break it off. If
And
it's
like
a-
also like if there's a movie that like has a scene that always ends up you going down a dark road at the end of the night, don't watch that movie.
yeah,
Or
right?
I'd say
Yeah.
most regular TV shows you can't watch.
definitely.
I've
definitely.
cut it out. Really, I don't have a TV, so
And really, any
that
kind
helps.
of any kind of prayer, because I think the only thing stronger than lust is love. When we love God more than we love our sin, we're going to be free of our sin, and so we have to work on cultivating that love for God, because that's the only motivating factor. I remember when my dad was in college, he was dating my mom, and my dad smoked like a fiend, 2 packs a day or whatever. And my mom said, "I'm not going to marry you if you keep smoking. Quit cold turkey," because love was more powerful than his addiction. And that's certainly the case for anyone struggling with sins of the flesh as well.
yeah, it takes time. I would say most people are probably going to fail and fail and fail and fail, but there might be this one confession where maybe someone's finally really open and truthful, or something that the priest says
Yeah.
changes them, or it's gradual over time and it just is no longer part of your life.
But that's an important point, is perseverance, not giving up, because it can be frustrating when you go to confession every week and have the same sins over and over again. You just can't seem to break free, but we don't become enslaved overnight, and so we won't be free
Yeah.
overnight.
My spiritual director said to me once, his measure of chastity is your measure of firmness for the Lord. And I was like, well, of
great
course I want to be firm. Are you kidding? I'm firm about my relationship with Jesus over everything else. But for me
Yeah.
to give in to a guy who just wants to use me, it's like, what the heck would I be doing? So that really struck me. Like, I don't know. Do people live a lie? Do they just feel like they can't get out of it? I don't know what it is. But when you truly face it, do you love Jesus, more than yourself, more than your sin? Like, are you really willing to not let anything get in between you and him? Because any of these sexual sins would be mortal sins, right?
Right.
Any of them. So death to your soul for like what? A little bit of pleasure?
Right. And I think that's an important piece. That a lot of people balk at the idea. Why is it a mortal sin? It's a natural part of life. But I think you made this perfect point, that because it's so high and so exalted, such a beautiful way in which two people can exchange their love for one another and very much act like God and bringing a new life into existence, because it's so exalted, to take that and to corrupt it is what makes it so devastating to our soul. To take one of God's greatest gifts and destroy it. But have hope, because it is indeed possible to live
Yeah.
chastely.
Persevere.
Not easy, difficult.
You
And I
might
think,
get dumped.
was that?
You might get dumped.
Yeah.
That
if you-
happened to me.
Did it really?
Yeah. I had to say, I'm not down to get down. And I knew right away. His face sunk. It
That's
was
a great
over.
line, though.
Is that how you said it? That's awesome.
Probably
Please tell me
something
that's how you
like
said
that.
it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah. We
But-
were like getting pizza. Like, it was a nice date. And I knew I had to say it.
Mm.
and
He kind of
that was
hinted in
it.
that direction a little
It
bit.
was over.
That's awesome. I'm
It
not
was-
down to get down.
Ladies, you can use that too.
Yeah, you know.
Not down to get down.
Put that on a t-shirt.
But that's true. You're right. You're absolutely right. Like
Oh, and
it's-
that, I mean, that was terrible. Like, it was devastating. But it also, you just realize, like, he just wanted to use me.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Like, you're not really willing to get to know me and love me and persevere. And no, you just want this quick means to an end
right.
for you. Really, it's for you. It's not for me in those situations.
And I think that's perfect. That's a perfect wrap up because Jason Everett says, "Chastity is the virtue that protects authentic love." And I think that's such a great positive look at chastity. It's it's not about saying no as it is saying yes to something good and joyful and freeing. And it's that authentic love that we were made for in our hearts that we really truly want at the depths of our being. So
Yes.
don't be afraid to fight for chastity, to pray for it, pray for that great virtue, pray to Our Lady, who of course has the most pure, immaculate heart, and continue to strive for it. Even if we fall 1,000 times a day, we come back to the Lord for His mercy, knowing that His mercy is endless, and He wants our freedom, and He will accomplish it in us if we continue to yield to Him for the holy virtue of holy purity. You've found us on Restless. Did you find
Veritas?
us? Veritas, there you go.
Catholic Network.
Thank you. Blanked out there for a moment.
14:50 a.m.
1350.
What do I
Come
know?
on, Joe.
He doesn't have the bumper sticker.
Couldn't even tell
clearly.
you how to access FM, so
Or you can find the app online at
right, yeah.
veritascatholic.com.
Like a normal person, all right?
Yeah.
And now on YouTube. So like, subscribe, leave us a comment. Tell
Share?
us how much you like Joe's
Sure.
hair. I don't know. Share.
A lot, no
Uh,
doubt. Like my hair a lot.
I don't know. Whatever else you may want to mention. And talk about other topics you want to hear from the Restless crew. So tune in next time to Restless.